The lights of the international broadcast studio were blinding, bouncing off the polished wood of the debate stage. Cameras hummed quietly, lenses pointed at the two men seated across from one another, Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young, defiant leader of Burkina Faso. The event had been marketed as a global dialogue on power, but everyone watching knew it would be a clash of egos. The air was thick with tension. You could almost feel the anticipation ripple across millions of viewers worldwide. MBS leaned forward first, his voice smooth but edged with arrogance. "Africa must understand," he said, locking eyes with the moderator before turning deliberately toward Traoré, "that true power lies with those who can project it. Without guidance, without order, your independence is fragile, temporary, an illusion." The studio hushed. Journalists' pens froze mid-note. The Crown Prince's words had been laced with a subtle insult, cloaked in diplomacy but sharpened enough to cut. He was testing Traoré, daring him to falter under the weight of global scrutiny. But Traoré did not flinch. His back straightened, his hands clasped calmly in front of him on the desk. He had been underestimated before, by generals, by politicians, by empires, and each time he had responded not with weakness, but with the unshakable confidence of someone carrying the weight of a continent's hope. His eyes flickered, steady and unblinking, toward the prince. And in that gaze alone, the atmosphere shifted. The stage no longer belonged to MBS. The moderator, sensing the silence grow unbearable, leaned in. "Captain Traoré, how do you respond to those who say Africa's independence relies on outside protection?" A small smile tugged at the corner of Traoré's lips. He exhaled slowly, preparing to deliver a line that would echo far beyond the studio walls. The air in the studio vibrated with silence after the moderator's question. Millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens, waiting. Traoré straightened in his chair, his military jacket catching the studio lights. His voice, steady and unshaken, carried the weight of a continent. "You speak of power as if it were something handed down," Traoré began, his words deliberate, his tone sharp. "But power is not inherited, nor imported. Power is built by people who choose to rise, even when the world insists they should bow." A murmur spread across the studio. The Crown Prince's smile faltered, just slightly, but it was enough to show he had not expected such a direct rebuttal. MBS tried to recover, chuckling under his breath as if amused. Yet the cameras caught the stiffness in his jaw. "You misunderstand," MBS countered, his tone now less polished. "Without strong alliances, without us, Africa risks collapse. We have built empires, commanded wealth, directed the future of nations. Can your young republic say the same?" The words dripped with condescension, painting Africa as dependent and small. His supporters in the audience nodded, confident that the balance of authority still rested with the prince. But Traoré did not waver. "Empires?" Traoré repeated, tilting his head slightly. "Every empire falls. Yours are no different. Africa does not seek to borrow strength from the ashes of others. We are building our own, and this time, no one will own us." The studio erupted, not in applause, not in boos, but in the electrifying buzz of disbelief. Commentators whispered frantically into microphones, scrambling to capture the moment that was already racing across social media feeds. MBS shifted in his seat, his smirk replaced by a hardened glare. For the first time, it was clear, this was not going to be a diplomatic exchange. It was going to be a battle of endurance, and only one voice would leave the stage victorious. The camera zoomed in on the two leaders, capturing every flicker of expression. Social media was already ablaze, hashtags about the clash trended across continents. Analysts on live feed speculated whether MBS had underestimated his opponent. The prince leaned back, trying to reassert his dominance with a casual gesture, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed the pressure. "Strong words," MBS said finally, his voice low but edged like steel. "But words do not defend nations. Weapons do. Money does. Influence does. Africa is still a guest at the global table, not the host. And guests do not dictate terms. The studio's atmosphere tightened. Supporters of the prince clapped, relieved by his sharp retort. Yet the applause was uneasy, short-lived. For the world could see Traoré had not even blinked. His calm composure under fire radiated a kind of authority that no applause could drown out. Traoré leaned forward now, his voice measured but carrying the force of conviction. You mistake silence for weakness. You mistake respect for obedience. But Africa is neither silent nor obedient. We are not guests at this table. We built our own table, with our own hands, and we sit where we choose. The words cut through the studio like a blade. Even the cameras seemed to linger longer on him, sensing the gravity of the declaration. Across the world, African youth watched with pride, their voices filling online platforms. Our leader speaks for us. MBS's eyes narrowed. He had not expected Traoré to match him strike for strike. He adjusted his cufflinks, stalling for time. For the first time, it seemed the crown prince of one of the world's wealthiest nations was struggling against a captain from one of its poorest. The moderator, sensing the escalation, tried to interject, but his voice was drowned by the roaring energy of the confrontation. This was no longer a debate, it was a duel for dignity, and the world was the witness. The tension in the studio had become unbearable. Even the moderator leaned back, surrendering control to the duel unfolding before him. This was no longer a moderated conversation, it was a contest of willpower between two men whose visions of the world collided head-on. MBS's tone sharpened, his patience thinning. Bold speeches do not shield nations, Captain. While you inspire crowds, I command resources that shape economies. Africa's pride will not protect it from hunger, from poverty, from war. Without allies like us, your people suffer. Gasps echoed through the audience. The insult had been direct, no longer hidden behind diplomacy. The camera zoomed closer to Traoré, waiting for his reaction. Traoré's face remained calm, though his eyes burned with a defiance that pierced the room. He waited a moment, long enough for silence to tighten its grip on the studio, before he answered. You speak as though suffering is new to us, he said, his voice steady and strong. Africa has survived slavery, colonization, and centuries of exploitation. Yet here we are. Still standing. Still rising. And we rise not because of outside saviors, but because of our people. If you think threats will bend us, then you have not learned from history, you have only repeated it. The audience stirred, some clapping, others stunned into silence. Around the world, the exchange exploded across headlines. Traoré defies MBS on live TV. Hashtags surged in Africa, in the Middle East, even in Europe and America. The clash had spilled beyond the studio, into living rooms, cafes, and parliaments. MBS's jaw tightened. For the first time, the crown prince looked unsettled, not broken, but challenged in a way he had not anticipated. The duel was shifting, the ground beneath him cracking as Traoré's words spread like fire. This was no longer about two leaders. It was about two worlds colliding, one clinging to empire, the other daring to redefine freedom. The studio was electric, the audience perched at the edge of their seats. Every word now felt like a blow, every pause a moment to catch breath in a duel that had turned into something larger than politics. MBS leaned forward, his voice rising with conviction. You speak of survival, Captain, but survival is not victory. You mistake endurance for strength. Nations that endure without progress remain stagnant, trapped in history's shadows. My nation builds, expands, dominates markets and energy. Africa? It risks being left behind. And when the world chooses sides, no speech will save you. The words dripped with confidence, sharpened with the arrogance of power. It was the kind of statement designed to crush an opponent with sheer inevitability. The crown prince's eyes scanned the crowd, expecting nods, approval, a wave of agreement. But then Traoré rose to his feet. His chair slid back silently, the sound of his boots echoing louder than the prince's boasts. Standing tall, he looked not at MBS, but directly into the camera, addressing not just the studio, but the entire world. "Progress measured by chains is no progress at all," he declared, his voice deep and unshaken. "Africa does not rise to mimic empires. We rise to break them. You warn of sides? Then let the world choose, chains or freedom, arrogance or dignity. And know this, Burkina Faso will never kneel." The studio erupted. Some applauded wildly, others gasped in disbelief. The clash was no longer confined to political elites, it had ignited the hearts of millions. Across Africa, his words were repeated in homes, in schools, in streets: "We rise to break them." MBS's smile faltered for the briefest second, his mask of composure slipping. The duel had tipped, and the prince knew it. For the first time, it was not wealth or weapons that commanded the room, but conviction. The broadcast was no longer just a debate, it had become a battlefield of words, and the world was watching. The moderator, visibly overwhelmed, struggled to regain order, but his voice was drowned by the tension pulsing through the audience. Cameras zoomed between the two leaders, capturing every flicker of expression, every breath. MBS leaned back in his chair, regaining his composure. His smile returned, though now it was colder, sharper. "You talk of breaking chains, Captain," he said, his tone heavy with disdain. "But chains are forged not only by power, they are reinforced by weakness. And Africa, divided as it is, lacks the unity to resist. Empires fall, yes, but nations without cohesion collapse first. If you defy the world, you will fall alone." The words sliced through the air like steel. Some in the audience nodded gravely, others shifted uncomfortably, sensing the cruelty beneath the polished rhetoric. MBS had struck at Africa's greatest wound, division. Traoré didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, placing both hands firmly on the table as though anchoring himself to the weight of history. His voice dropped, low and commanding, echoing like a drumbeat. "You mistake division for weakness," he replied. "But every empire that underestimated Africa learned the same lesson: we may fight among ourselves, but when outsiders strike, we rise as one. We have nothing to lose but chains, and men with nothing to lose cannot be broken." The studio erupted once more. Applause thundered from some corners while silence hung heavy in others. Viewers across Africa exploded online, hashtags multiplying, hashtag "We Rise as One" and hashtag "Traorésms." What was meant to be a simple televised discussion had turned into a rallying cry for a continent. MBS's smile stiffened, his hands tightening on the desk. For the first time, the weight of the moment pressed on him, and the clash that began with arrogance was slipping from his control. The studio lights burned hotter, but it was not the lamps, it was the intensity of the clash radiating between the two leaders. What began as a test of words had transformed into a duel for dignity, and every sentence seemed to draw battle lines across continents. MBS's tone hardened further, now laced with menace. "You call this unity? Empty slogans shouted by desperate men. Unity cannot be declared, it must be enforced. And enforcement requires power. You can speak to your people all you want, Captain, but when the pressure comes, when sanctions crush your economy and alliances close their doors, speeches will not save you. Power respects power, and you have none." Gasps rippled through the audience. It was a direct dismissal, a challenge that cut to the heart of Traoré's defiance. The Crown Prince leaned back, his hands folded, as though sealing his words like a verdict. But Traoré's eyes burned with fire. He straightened, his voice booming with unshakable authority. "You think power is measured in oil, in wealth, in weapons. But true power is not what you hold, it is what you inspire. Africa's strength is not counted in dollars, it is counted in the millions who refuse to kneel. Sanctions? Let them come. Isolation? We have lived it before. But we endured. And we will endure again. Because a people who own their dignity can never be owned by anyone else. The crowd erupted, louder than ever. The very walls of the studio seemed to shake from the roar of applause and chants. Online, millions were sharing clips within seconds, making Traoré's words echo across the digital world like thunder. MBS's smirk faded into something colder, tighter. He was used to commanding silence with his presence. But here, in this arena, Traoré had seized the narrative, and it was slipping beyond the prince's reach. By now, the debate had long escaped the confines of the studio. Screens across Africa, the Middle East, and beyond lit up with the clash, turning living rooms, cafes, and public squares into extensions of the battlefield. Hashtags trended worldwide, voices shouting in unison for or against each man. MBS, unwilling to concede ground, leaned forward, his voice sharp and calculated. You speak of dignity, but dignity without strength is just poetry. Africa may clap for you tonight, but when the lights go out, who will feed them? Who will protect them? Empty words don't fill stomachs, and they don't shield against bullets. Leaders like you are dangerous, Captain, not because you have power, but because you give false hope. The audience grew tense. Some shifted in their seats, recognizing the sting in his words. It was not merely a political jab, it was an attempt to brand Traoré as reckless, as a dreamer whose defiance could lead his people into ruin. Traoré's response came not with anger, but with steel. He rose slightly from his chair, eyes locked on his opponent. Hope is only false when it is sold by men like you. What you call false hope, we call faith. And faith has carried nations through storms stronger than anything you can imagine. You say dignity cannot shield against bullets, then tell me, why did empires armed with bullets and bombs fall before unarmed people who simply refused to kneel? Power built on fear collapses. But power built on the will of the people, it endures forever. The audience exploded into applause, so thunderous the microphone struggled to capture it. Across social media, the debate had crystallized into a single narrative. MBS represented intimidation, Traoré embodied defiance. And in that moment, viewers could sense it, the clash was no longer about two men. It was about the soul of nations, and the struggle between domination and freedom. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Even the moderators, usually quick to steer the discussion, sat frozen, unwilling to interrupt the sheer force of words clashing in front of them. MBS narrowed his eyes, his tone colder now, cutting like a blade. Faith is a song sung by the weak when reality crushes them. You speak of empires falling, Captain, but history is clear, it is not speeches that write the future, it is steel, oil, and wealth. You can defy me with words, but when markets close their doors, when your allies abandon you, will your people still cheer? Or will they curse your name? The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the sharp intake of breath from the audience. It was the most brutal strike yet, aimed not at Traoré's strength, but at the faith of his people in him. Traoré let the words hang for a moment. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, he placed his hands on the table, leaning forward, his eyes burning with a mix of fury and calm. His voice thundered through the room. History is also clear on this. Nations with oil and wealth, with steel and armies, have fallen because they underestimated the will of the people. You ask if my people will curse me? No, they will curse the day they were told to kneel by men who believed their wealth made them gods. And they will remember this: we did not bow. Not to you. Not to anyone. The studio audience erupted, some shouting, some clapping, some stunned into silence. Online, the debate was already being carved into history. Traoré's words were spreading like wildfire, fueling a narrative of defiance against arrogance. And in that moment, it became clear, this was no longer just a televised debate. It was a declaration of resistance, one that echoed far beyond the studio walls. The lights seemed brighter, the air heavier, as the final moments of the debate approached. Both men knew that whatever they said now would echo far beyond the studio, replayed in news broadcasts and social media clips for weeks to come. MBS straightened his posture, his voice low but heavy with menace. "Remember this night, Captain. You can shout, you can inspire, but in the end, it is the strong who decide the fate of nations. And when the storm comes, Africa will remember who truly holds power." The audience hushed, waiting for Traoré's answer. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every twitch, every flicker in his expression. He did not hesitate. Rising to his feet, his uniform catching the studio lights, Traoré raised his hand slightly, not to silence the crowd, but to command the moment. His words thundered across the room. "You are right, Mohammed. Africa will remember this night. But not as the night we bowed. Not as the night we feared your storm. They will remember it as the night we stood tall, when the world tried to remind us of chains, and we shattered them. You say the strong decide the fate of nations. I say the strong are those who fight for their people, not those who try to own them. And history will carve one truth: Africa bows to no empire." The studio erupted. The applause, the cheers, the roars blended into one unstoppable wave. Online, the clip was already being shared with captions like, "The roar of defiance," and "Africa's voice cannot be silenced." In that instant it was clear, Traoré had not only answered the challenge, he had transformed it into a rallying cry. The battle of words was over, but the movement his words sparked was only beginning.